You can almost directly connect the dots between the bad version of Julius Randle last season to the bad version of the Minnesota Timberwolves last season, and then flip it and do the same for the good version of Julius Randle and the good version of the Wolves. We're talking about a guy who looked like the main reason Minnesota was struggling around 500 during the first half of the season, and a guy who was dominant in the back end of the season and those 2 straight playoff series wins. It was a crazy juxtaposition for both Randle and the Wolves, but it wasn't coincidence. His game took on some pretty dramatic changes, and that directly impacted Minnesota's run to the conference finals last season, and it's likely to impact what they do next season now that they're running it back with Randle signed on for 3 more years. You can see here how his numbers ticked up after he came back from injury after the All-Star break, both in terms of efficiency and with his potential assists as a playmaker. Now I want to get into the stylistic changes he made in his game, which I think is the most important shift that we did see, but it is important to point out the improved 3-point shooting numbers here and how that impacted his effectiveness. We all know how important shooting is in today's game and how hurtful missing open looks from deep can be for a team, so I don't think I can just skim past how much of a difference it made for the Wolves to have Randle making threes at the back end of the season compared to the way he was clanking these open looks throughout the first few months. Minnesota was already shooting deprived in their starting unit, with Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels in there as well, and when Randle's shooting started to disrupt the flow of their offense, it did become a real problem. Capitalizing off Edwards drawing these 2 defenders off the ball screen should be bread and butter for Randle's shooting game, but that just wasn't there to begin the season. That means teams became more willing to throw 2 on the ball at Ant when Randle was 1 pass away, and Minnesota lost one of its easiest offensive actions that they had there with Karl Anthony Towns. And then defenses started to extend that to wherever Randle was on the court. If he was in the weak side corner, his man would happily overcommit as the low man helper, with no real fear of being punished by a Randle 3. If he was in the strong side corner, his defender would sit heavy in these gaps on Edwards and risk Randle making him pay on that simple kick-out pass. So when Randle did catch a rhythm with his 3 ball, it was obvious right away how much that helped Minnesota's offense. Now when Ant comes off that screen and the defense allows Randle to pop out here uncontested, that becomes simple 2-man game that Minnesota relied on a ton down the stretch of the season. I speak about it a lot, but as long as teams are going to jam up Edwards with 2 on the ball like this, then they're going to need players who can score directly from that, and Randle as a pick and pop shooter needs to be one of those scoring avenues. The same thing applies for when he's in that strong side corner and the helper is in these positions. If Randle is making those jumpers, then he becomes a much more dangerous weapon in Minnesota's offense. Now look, Randle's jumper is always going to come and go. It's been that way throughout his entire career, so I think the more bankable shift in his game during the back half of the season was actually the speed he played his game at. Earlier in the season, Randle rarely played off the catch, and when he did it in a way that brought the offense to a standstill. There was too much dribbling, too much east-west movement, and too many possessions where he was turning drives into slow post-up opportunities. I think turning these possessions into straight-line torpedo drives completely changed Minnesota's season. Randle got to a point where as soon as he saw his defenders front foot on these closeouts, he started attacking downhill right away. There was no hesitation, no extra dribbles, no side-to-side movement. He became a demon off the catch, and that instantly made him a better fit on this Minnesota roster. When Randle was playing with that sort of attacking mentality, that's when he became a real matchup nightmare. If a big is closing out on him here, he's too nimble and too quick for them to stop once he puts the ball on the deck. Again, if bigs are having to defend in space and close out on him, he's too quick off the mark for them to keep up with. I thought Randle looked leaner and faster coming back from injury, but mostly this felt like a mentality thing. Whether it was physical, or just having a better synergy with his team, or simply shifting that mindset completely to fit in better, Randle became a tough cover for big defenders to handle. And because he's a big who is built like a big, smaller defenders struggle with his new attacking mind state as well. Against those smaller defenders, he's able to use his strength and that quickness to overpower them and get to the rim with relative ease, as long as he's playing in that fast downhill style that became such a massive part of his game in the second half of the season and into the playoffs. Even if Randle wasn't getting all the way downhill to the rim, opening up better mid-range looks became so much easier when he was playing at this pace off the catch. If he's attacking into this mid-range area off the bounce, it's easier for him to get his man off balance when he pulls up, making those mid-range jumpers more efficient than when he was slowly kind of working his way into them with a defender draped all over him. It's just more difficult for a defender to take this bump and stay squared up when Randle is going downhill with such force, and that led to better looks and greater efficiency. While you can see here that the number of drives per game stayed pretty even throughout the season, his efficiency skyrocketed in the second half of the regular season and then again in the playoffs, where he became more of a scoring force than a playmaker. Still, his ability to make plays for his teammates was really on show when he came back from that injury, and again, that seemed to be aided by his willingness to play quicker off the dribble. Because he is such a load to deal with in these situations, teams are going to send extra bodies toward him on the drive, and that's going to create open looks around him, and he's a smart enough playmaker to find those pretty consistently. With Mike Conley aging out and Rob Dillingham still yet to prove his readiness, the Wolves really do need Randle to be a playmaker, and this is one way he can do that pretty reliably if he's playing this way. And this faster, more movement-heavy style of game kind of permeated through everything Randle did in this stretch of games. He's never going to be a huge off-ball mover, but I love the way he began to sprinkle more cuts into his offense, something that we don't see enough of in Minnesota's offense as a whole. Like, instead of going to spot up in the corner here, he curls to the front of the rim and seals off his man deep in the paint for 2 easy points. That's a level of off-ball activity that we just didn't see from him during the beginning of his Wolves tenure. Again, I think early season Randle would have stayed here, camped out above the arc, instead of diving to the rim on this 45 cut and creating a passing outlet for his teammates and rim points for himself. These are small things in the grand scheme, but they point to a player who was more willing to conform to the things that a slow, plodding offense needed, rather than being one of those slow, plodding players himself. Now, I think what the Wolves need even more from Randle next season, that kind of plays into what I'm talking about here with his ability to make decisions going downhill as a scorer and a playmaker, is to be involved on both sides of a pick and roll more often, both as a player handling the ball and as a roll man. On a points per possession basis, Randle was Minnesota's most efficient pick and roll ball handler in both the regular season and the playoffs. The sample size here is pretty small, but with his blend of speed, power, and finishing ability going downhill, having him come off more ball screens would be a different wrinkle to add into Minnesota's offense. And again, if they can find ways to have him take on a bigger chunk of their playmaking, that's going to be a good thing for this team. I'd love to really find out if he's able to draw this big defender coming off the screen and then find Rudy Gobert slipping in behind that defense on a more consistent basis, because that would be a huge development for Minnesota's offense. With no guaranteed reliable point guard next season, throwing a few more pick and rolls Randle's way and letting that two-man chemistry grow could be a fun way to mitigate that lack of point guard play. And because he's even more capable at reading the defender coming over to help on Gobert's role and then finding shooters on the perimeter, I do think there's room for him to grow into that role as well. He totaled up just over 100 pick and roll ball handler possessions last season, but I do think they could probably double or even triple that next season and still find pretty good efficiency from Randle, while maybe even allowing Anthony Edwards to spend a little more time off ball. The same goes for using Randle as the screener in these situations. It's a little more difficult to get that going when Gobert is on the floor, but since we've seen how much better Randle plays when he's attacking downhill, working to generate possessions where he's spinning off a pick and rolling into seams like this should be a core principle within Minnesota's offense. Again, it's easier when Gobert isn't on the floor and Randle can play in more of a spread floor situation, but I do think he showed some pretty good touch on the short roll as a passer who can read the low man and find Gobert for lobs or dump-offs in the dunker spot or kick out to shooters as well. It seems like, at least for now, Minnesota are committed to Julius Randle as a core piece to their puzzle, and this is still a team who will have championship aspirations next season. If those dreams are going to come anywhere close to being true, it's going to have to involve Randle playing as this downhill scoring and playmaking force who can also make shots from deep just like he did in the second half of the season. With the added bonus of continuity helping to fuel that from the beginning of next season rather than having this adjustment period at the start of the season, Minnesota really need that version of Julius Randle to be their reality going forward. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you can support Howls and Growls in the links below. If not, you can always like this video or subscribe to the channel to see more breakdowns like this one. Thanks again for watching.